We've now centralized all the code for our application inside of our app.js file. So again, this has the benefit of allowing us to test against an Android or iOS build without having to worry about any platform-specific configuration. Thinking back to the mockups that we looked at for this app, let's pull those up real quick. There we go. So thinking back to these mockups, we definitely had a lot of components in here, such as the header, the buttons, and the card views. Rather than rebuild all these from scratch, I'm going to suggest that we just copy paste these files over from our last project. After all, that is the goal of reusable components. We want to be able to avoid having to remake the same elements over and over again. And I don't know about you, but if I had to make the header a second time inside this course, I wouldn't be terribly happy. But anyways, there's some really fancy ways to import code over or kind of share it between projects. And we certainly could, but we're going to keep things here just for the sake of this course. Very simple, very straightforward. We're just going to copy paste a few files. That's all we're going to do. So I want to copy paste a handful of components out of my previous project, our albums project, and then just drop them directly into this auth project. Okay, so not a lot of magic here. We're just going to do the copy paste. So inside my components directory, or excuse me, inside my source directory, we'll start by making a components folder. So I'll make my components folder like so. And then this time around, I'm going to make another folder inside of here, and I call it common. And the goal here is that any reusable components that I have inside my project, I'm going to place them all inside this common directory. And you'll see why in just a minute. This is going to be a really nice trick that we're going to use here for our reusable components. Okay, so this common folder right here is where I want to put my reusable components from the last section. So now we'll do a little bit of copy pasting. I'm going to open up my file explorer here, and honestly you can do this copy pasting process however you want. So you can use the terminal, you can use your code editor, however you want to get your files over here is totally fine by me. But for me, just to make everything nice and easy for everyone, I'm going to do it in a very visual fashion by doing the actual dragging and dropping. So let me pull open my React Native project directory. Here we go. There we go. So I've got my components directory from my albums project in one window. And then in my other window, I've got my auth, source, components, common directory. So I'm just going to take my button, my card section, and my header components, and I'm going to just drop them all inside that common directory. And it should be a really fast copy paste over. So now I've got button, card section, and header all inside of that common directory right here. As a quick aside, if you feel as though your 4 components right here, we are going to depend on these pretty heavily. If yours are not working perfectly, you can always hop on the official GitHub repo for this course and just copy paste the code for each of these files directly. You can just get a nice fresh copy. As a reminder, you can find the link to the GitHub repo in one of the very first sections inside this course. You just hop right on over there, go find these project files, and just copy them right into your project directory. Okay, so that's that. Inside, I'm going to pop my code editor back open here, and yep, now I can verify that I've got my 4 components inside the common directory. Okay, so now here's a little trick I mentioned. We know that components like the login form that we're going to create in a little bit, I've only vaguely mentioned the login form, but the login form is going to be the thing that's going to house the actual login form here. We know that it's going to need to require several different components out of that common directory, right? We know that it's definitely going to need the button, it's going to need the card, it's going to need the card section. We're going to need to import quite a few things out of that single directory right there. That means that we would have to stack up a bunch of import statements that all import stuff out of the same directory. And you know what? Having a ton of import statements at the top of your file, it gets a little bit tiresome to read, right? You don't want to see, whenever you open a file, something like that, right? It just gets old really quickly. So I'm going to suggest a little bit of a workaround, a nice little trick that's going to dramatically simplify the number of import statements that we have to use inside this application. So I'm going to pull a diagram up really quick of exactly how this is going to work. All right, so here's the strategy here. Inside of our common folder, we're going to create a new file called index.js. So don't confuse this with the top level index iOS.js and index Android.js files. This is a completely separate one, all right, completely separate index.js file. So inside of index.js, we will import the header, the button, the card section, and the card, and then we will immediately export them. Then when any other component that wants to use any of these files, or if I have a single component that wants to get access to the header and the button, we will be able to import both those components from just components/common. Take note that the import string here in the diagram actually is correct. I have not actually specified a file here, but whenever we have a file called index.js inside of a directory, and I'm suggesting that we do, if we try to import from that directory without specifying a file, it will by default pick up that index file. Okay, so basically if we leave off any very particular file, we will get a default of index.js come back to us. As a quick aside, that's why you generally see the file name of index floating all over the place in really large or established React projects. Okay, so let's give this a shot. It really shouldn't be too bad. In my common folder, I'm going to make a new file called index.js. Then inside of here, we are going to we're going to import and export each of these other components in just a single line here. So we're going to use a little bit of a trick to do that. Normally, we might do something like, say, import button from button and then export button, right? Instead, we're going to do this entire step all in one line. To do so, we will write export star, that's Shift 8 on your keyboard, from button. So in a single line here, this imports and exports the button component. So then we will repeat the same step for our other files as well. Our card section. And we're going to, one thing that we made a mistake on much earlier, I used a lowercase on the header here. I'm going to fix that issue right now. So very important, I'm going to fix the header issue. I have capital H right here. I'm going to fix up my header file by just renaming it to use a capital H as well. So capital H header. Now everything across the board is nice and consistent. So again, this statement here, these statements, each of these, is essentially a pass-through. It can be read as take everything from the button file and export it from this one, like export it from index.js. One last thing though, you'll notice that each of these, I've got an ESLint error here, it says no named exports found in module button. So the one downside to this approach that I'm taking right here is if I want to use this pattern, I cannot use the default keyword inside of each of these files. So I'm inside of my button component right now. If I want to use this approach, I cannot use the default keyword. Instead, I have to export an object with a key of button. So I would have to do something like this. So I want to export an object with a key of button and a value of the actual component, which is button. And of course, you'll also notice that because I've got a key and a value that are identical, I can use a little bit of ES6 to condense this down to just button, like so. So again, the one twist here, if you're using this export star syntax, we have to make sure that we just export something without that default keyword. And when I save here, you'll see that that error now falls off. So we're going to repeat the same process in the other files as well. Inside of my card component, I will go down to the bottom. I'm going to take off the default keyword and wrap it with curly braces. I'm going to do the same thing for my card section. Replace it with curly braces, and then the same thing with the header as well. Okay, so now all four of my reusable components have a single export statement at the bottom. Here's my export, and my export. And now my index.js file is all happy. So no errors from ESLint. If you still have something or some errors from ESLint, keep in mind that ESLint just hit Command S to save the file and you should see those errors drop off. If ESLint is still complaining, I would encourage you to just close the index file and open it back up and you should be good to go. Okay, so one last step here. I want to just make sure that everything is working as we expect. So I'm going to flip back over to our app component and I want to test out this new import strategy. So at the very top, I will import header from components common. And notice that I do not have to specify that index file. If I just specify a directory, by default it will go to the index.js file. In addition, I only want to get the header out of here, so I'm going to destructure header out of that index file. Then inside of our component, I'll locate the header and I'll give it a header text of authentication, like so. Cool. Let's go ahead and give this a test out in our simulator. So I'll flip over, refresh, and hot dog. It all worked out, hooray! So again, this whole pattern right here, I know that the refactor was a little bit of a pain, but the entire idea behind it was that we can now put all of our reusable components inside that common directory and then just have one single import statement to get access to all of them. So definitely makes life a little bit easier. Let's continue in the next section and get started with Firebase.